Donald Trump is already laying down a marker in his second term.
The next item here is the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Treaty.
Bringing changes that the majority of people here in the state of Massachusetts voted against. The runner-up, Democratic candidate Kamala Harris, had success here. But beyond the Trump-Harris battle that dominated the election, unwilling to vote for Democrats or Republicans, many turned to independents. Like three-time presidential candidate Jill Stein of the Green Party. She came in third in the popular vote. The Democrats urged progressives who were angry at Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, mainly over Gaza, not to rebel, warning them that a vote for Stein would effectively hand the election to Trump. The numbers show that Stein wasn't the reason he won. Stein campaigned on the hard left of the American political spectrum. She wants a Green New Deal. She calls Israel's war on Gaza a genocide, and she wants to end US support of foreign wars like in Ukraine. On a cold morning in December, I went to meet Stein at her home just outside of Boston. On this episode of the InnerView, we'll sit down with former US presidential candidate Jill Stein to ask her how she assesses her election performance, and we give her the opportunity to explain how she wants to change the way American governments do politics at home and abroad. Dr. Jill Stein, really nice of you to invite us into your home. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for coming.
You're one of the few doctors, the others are all PhDs in political science or whatever. You've got an interesting background, musician, medical doctor, Harvard trained, and politician. You ran for president. Is it fair to say you did poorly this time around?
In my view, we did better than ever.
Tell me why.
I think you have to view in context what is the situation. The American state of democracy is in crisis, in complete crisis. And in this election, more energy was expended to silence all political opposition. And we actually emerged at the top of opposition parties. So we've come out of this as the number one party of political opposition, the number one party against genocide and endless war, in support of working people and real action on the climate crisis. So we were the one voice representing that real coalition in the election, and all opposition voices were suppressed. The number of Americans staying home, eligible voters who did not vote, was practically at an all-time high, more than in 2020. Over 1 out of every 3 eligible American voters is not voting, and they did not have an opportunity to know that there was actually a candidate that represented their chief concerns. And those voters who are staying home are largely disenfranchised voters, younger, lower income, and of color. So that's the demographic that our agenda actually speaks to. Their voices were entirely shut out. I think an election that is more suppressed, more politically silenced than ever needs to be viewed. Those numbers really need to be viewed in context.
Okay.
So given what's going on, we see ourselves playing a critical role and actually getting a sort of mandate in emerging as the number one opposition party at a time when people are really hungry for a different kind of politics, when it's widely recognized now that most voters were voting against who they most disliked rather than for a candidate they wanted, yet we were fundamentally shut out. Democrats had hired an army of lawyers in order to throw opposition candidates off the ballot. They publicly advertised for infiltrators and spies in order to mess up our ballot access and the rest of our campaigns. They actually had the gall to publicly advertise for infiltrators and spies. This time we suspected that's been going on for a long time, but now they're actually public about doing that. And towards the end of the campaign, an investigative report by Time magazine showed that the Democrats had an actual war room in order to suppress largely our campaign. And the budget of that war room was greater than the budget of our entire campaign. They had more staffers than we had and were spending far more money. So, to look at the numbers alone, you'd think, a disappointing number. But in fact, to view this in context, that we not only emerged as the number one opposition party, but also looking at this historically, not just at a moment in time.
Just for a second, up until the day of the election, you were not saying the numbers are going to be low, but look at this in context. You were still saying there's a possibility I could become president. So
that depends who you were listening to.
But I mean, you got 0.5% of
that's right.
the vote, 782,089 people out of 155 million votes, right? So in that context, would you really seriously have seen that as a success before the vote?
So my message about that, because I've been through this many times, not everyone in our campaign has. So I've run for president 3 times. I've also run for other offices. And to my mind, the goal is not only to win, but it's actually to build the infrastructure, the visibility, to build the movement with which one can eventually win. So to my mind, it's not so much the numbers that count as it is the sense of the community of opposition. And do you emerge with more resolve to keep fighting? Do you emerge with new and powerful partners in a completely unprecedented coalition? And in my view, I wasn't even following the numbers the night of the election.
What do you mean?
We had a victory party and we were celebrating the campaign, regardless of the numbers, because in my mind and in the mind of many in our campaign, this was an absolute victory considering what we were up against. Also, you can say the Green Party is weak, but compared to what? Right. See, all other opposition parties, you can't even remember who they are. Not only were they invisible in this race, but any party that dares to challenge the empire is essentially wiped out within 10 years. They are gone as an entity. The old Labor Party in this country, the various socialist parties, the Peace and Freedom Party, which was a previous anti-war party that had some ballot status. So we basically are the only show in town at this point. And you can say, yes, that's it's not strong, but it's not strong because of the incredible, vicious political repression that we face.
When Democrats see the challenge that they have over the next 4 years up against Donald Trump, who's promising deportations and tariffs and getting rid of this woke garbage, as he calls it, and so on and so forth, they see themselves as the opposition against something that's seemingly insurmountable because he's been elected now for a second time, against this momentum of something that's fundamentally against their values. Yet you are calling yourself the opposition party. Help me understand this.
Well, I think you can look at the American voters, because what did they do in this election? You had a lot of disenfranchised voters who switched over to Donald Trump, not, including the Arab American community, many voters, as well as many African Americans and Hispanic Americans, in spite of what Trump's explicit agenda was. Although he did things to try to fuzzy it up, touring through Michigan with an Arab American mayor. And, there was just a lot of confusion about what his policies were, but we are seeing very clearly now what they are. So I think people were very much misled about who he was, but then what predominated in terms of American public opinion was the sense again of outrage against the Democrats, against the Biden campaign, against the Obama campaign, against the Clinton campaign, both Clintons actually before him, the World Trade agreements that have been so horrible for American workers and workers all around the world, the Wall Street bailouts, which took place under Obama, in spite of a Democratic supermajority in Congress. Right. We had Wall Street was bailed out to the tune of trillions of dollars, while American homeowners were thrown out. So there's just a huge and growing wave of resentment against the Democrats because they talk the talk, but they walk the walk for Wall Street at the end of the day. That is who is really profiting and benefiting from the Democratic agenda, the so-called neoliberal agenda.
So disenfranchised Democrats, why did they not vote for you? Why did they vote for Trump? You got 51% of this vote. Again, you got 0.5. So they're disenfranchised. Everything that you're spelling out is absolutely true.
That's right.
About the deep structural fundamental problems over the past couple of decades, perhaps.
Yes.
Why did they turn to Trump and not you?
Well, this is why the Democrats turned to unprecedented techniques and strategies to keep us invisible, so that most voters didn't even know that we were a choice or what we actually represented, did not know the realities. You know, it takes an informed critic to critique both Republicans and Democrats. Democrats do a good job of critiquing Republicans, but there is nobody really to actually critique the Democrats. The Republicans pretend that the Democrats are a progressive, even Marxist party, but in fact, the Democrats are another, Wall Street serving war machine serving political party.
Right.
And if people don't know, if we can't talk about the genocide, for example, which 68% of Americans are horrified by, which over 60% of Americans demand a weapons embargo now in order to stop. And suppressing our campaign was a way to ensure that genocide would not be discussed, that no one would be held accountable, not for the genocide, not for the fact that the war machine is consuming over half of the Congress's budget, so that instead of funding solutions to the real emergencies that Americans are facing in healthcare, in housing, with half of all Americans struggling to keep a roof over their heads right now, the crisis of education and student debt and medical debt and all of that, the reality that the average American household, and this is a Jeffrey Sachs statistic, is paying something like $12,000 per household for the war machine over the course of just the last year. So Americans are being raked over the coals. It's absolutely imperative that they suppress our voice, because our critique holds accountable Democrats every bit as much as Republicans. So it's the Democrats that, above all, are trying to silence us. So most voters had no idea. If you took a look, for example, at the Breakfast Club interview of my running mate, Butch Ware, and myself, and that is a very popular podcast. So if you read the comments on that, over 20,000 comments saying, wow, I wasn't going to vote in this election. I had no idea that the Stein-Ware campaign was here representing me. I'm going out to basically not just vote for them, but also to register green. This absolutely struck terror into the hearts of the Democrats, and that's when they really began to smear us. This was the first election in which one of the major parties actually targeted and was that threatened by an independent candidate that they actually spent money on an advertising campaign against us.
You said this is in Time magazine. I need to look at it.
That particular statistic is all over the place. And also,
I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you in a way relieved that you were not the spoiler that they said you would be in the swing states? Because in 2016, there's an argument to be made. I know you rebut it by saying these are people who wouldn't have voted who ended up voting for you, right?
Absolutely.
So in 2016,
yes.
Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, the amount of votes you got were more than the margin
of difference
between Trump and Hillary
Clinton. And it would have taken a miracle to get those people to have
But
voted
this time,
Democratic.
looking at the numbers, you were not the spoiler. Does that relieve you a little bit? Do you feel a sigh of relief that actually they can't pin the Trump victory on you? You were not the spoiler this time?
It's really funny because the concept of spoiler, they keep moving the goalposts. So now many people consider myself and other independent anti-genocide, anti-war candidates as spoilers simply for running and exercising our democracy. So, I think if you're in the business of challenging empire, you're gonna You're going to pay for it. There are consequences, but that does confirm that you are, in fact, challenging the system, which, I could not conscience not challenging a genocide, not challenging crushing economic inequality, which is really devastating our economy, and not challenging the climate collapse. And also a big issue for us, even then, now validated by the course of events, is the fact of nuclear weapons and the fact that we are accelerating towards nuclear war rather quickly now, in a way which is absolutely jaw-dropping.
I'm going to give you some names. Give me one word to define or describe these people. Let me start with somebody I think you like very much. Ralph Nader.
Hero, absolute hero.
Okay. Bernie Sanders.
Pretty good most of the time, but kind of throws in the towel when it really counts.
Okay. Barack Obama.
Serving Wall Street.
The Clintons.
Same.
Donald Trump.
Serving more Donald Trump, I think, than anyone else, but definitely a tool of oligarchy.
Kamala Harris.
Similar. And I would add Joe Biden.
Joe Biden as well.
Yeah.
So, RFK Jr.
Harder to pigeonhole, but what shall we say? That doesn't compel confidence and trust.
Let's go overseas. Benjamin Netanyahu.
Worst war criminal, murderer, genocider that I have, in my lifetime, certainly.
Vladimir Putin.
A very mixed picture. Definitely, committing human rights abuses, but on the other hand, a very shrewd diplomat who is willing to negotiate when others aren't, and that's critical.
Bashar al-Assad.
I'd say, largely from what I know of him, a major human rights abuser. Who has nonetheless, protected the sovereignty of Syria, but at incredible cost to the people of Syria, who really should be the sovereign force in Syria.
I watched an interview that you did with my former colleague Malika on The Take on Al Jazeera, and she was asking you about the situation in Xinjiang, because she said the Muslim American community very impressed and very encouraged by your position on Gaza and the genocide, but your mixed position on China, your mixed position on Syria and so on, they had questions. One of the things you said was that we don't get much news that we can trust out of the United States. So where do you get your news?
Many sources. And I wish there was just one, but you can't rely on just one. So I try to get a variety of sources, including Al Jazeera, including The Intercept, Democracy Now! To some extent. I mean, Glenn Greenwald, I listen to a lot. Right. Jeremy Scahill and the new outfit that he has founded. So I try to get a wide perspective. And let me just add on the question of Bashar al-Assad. I by no means want to whitewash in any way the cruelty and the human rights abuses that he's conducted. But he has also, been under, under the attack of American covert forces and Project Timber Sycamore. And I'm sure you've heard Jeffrey Sachs talk about that. So it's hard, to completely pigeonhole everyone, but I do want to be clear that it is the Syrian people who are paying the greatest price and are the victims of many proxy wars taking place on their soil right now.
You see, when I asked you about Netanyahu, there was no but. But with Putin and with Assad, there is a but after the preface. Tell me why.
Because the situations are complex. With Netanyahu, it's very straightforward. And Netanyahu has fulfilled all the criteria of arch-villain. And he also is not someone who will negotiate or with whom we can negotiate. We need to create a weapons embargo.
Right.
And I think an economic embargo as well. So there's no negotiating to be done with him. On the other hand, I think we very much need to negotiate, certainly with Vladimir Putin. We need to negotiate. He now has missiles that are many times faster than what we have. So we better well learn how to start negotiating, because we don't just have a gun to our head, we've got a cannon to our head.
So is there no but with Netanyahu because he's an ally that you are sponsoring, whereas with Putin, he's an adversary that you need to negotiate with, or else the possibilities are ominous on the other end?
Extremely.
Right.
Yes.
Nuclear war, perhaps. Just to stay on this a little bit, do you trust Amnesty International?
For the most part, but yes, I mean, they just came out with their report.
They said it's a genocide, right?
That this is genocide, and the World Court and the International Court of Justice. I mean, every authority out there has really labeled this as a genocide and made clear in no uncertain terms that it needs to stop now. We have the power to do that. And, this is a US genocide as much as it is an Israeli genocide. So we have to be very clear about what needs to be done.
So Amnesty have also called Putin a war criminal. Do you trust them when they say that?
Technically, yes. Vladimir Putin is violating international law by undertaking the assault on Ukraine.
Is he a war criminal?
So I try to avoid using inflammatory terms when we need to be talking to people.
But I mean, you've said Netanyahu is a war criminal.
Well, we don't need to talk to him. You don't need to. It's useless to talk to him.
Amnesty
he
have
needs
also
to be compelled.
They've also said that China's repression of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang is draconian repression, mass internment camps, and severe human rights abuses. Are they right?
So, again, this is an area where I feel like there is some fog of war going on, even though there's not exactly a war. But I do hear compelling stories from both sides. No doubt there is truth here. There's definitely truth that there are human rights abuses going on. Whether they meet the definition of genocide, I don't know. But let me say that we are sponsoring what's going on in Gaza right now. We are the sponsors. To my mind, that makes this a real standalone issue that we must take action for, and that blood is on our hands right now.
So I have one final question for you. Since you got into politics, since you first ran in 2002 here in Massachusetts, I think that's when Mitt Romney won, right, and became governor. Was that it? Yeah, 2002?
That's right, yes.
Since then, and running for president 3 times, what have you learned about power in this country?
That it is exceedingly fragile, that our current power structure is a paper tiger, and it is actually in collapse right now by any measure. The groundwork on which it stands is crumbling. It's absolutely crumbling, whether you're looking at any indicator of our economy, our healthcare system, our health, for God's sake, which is completely going down the tubes in this country, though we are spending twice as much per capita as the next biggest spender. The state of debt, the state of our colleges, the state of our schools, the climate, the environment, our oceans, our air quality, and the state of foreign affairs. We are at the precipice. We are sitting on the knife's edge right now of a nuclear exchange. And as has been pointed out by Larry Wilkerson, the former chief of staff for Colin Powell, or by Scott Ritter, who was the UN weapons inspector, who said there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. He not only knew that, he had the courage to stand up and say it. The people who really understand these systems now are terrified at the position we're in now in Ukraine. Because Joe Biden gave the thumbs up for these long-range missiles, Russia now has demonstrated that they can wipe out whatever target they want in Europe, and they've not yet demonstrated their long-range versions of those missiles, but the odds are, and various testing has suggested, that their missiles go, like 20 times the speed of sound. We don't stand a chance here. All these notions that, we have some protective umbrella, forget it. We do not want to be butting heads with anyone right now. In fact, I think the name of the game, is that we need to denuclearize and we need to demilitarize. And we need to start putting the resources in this country and around the world into actually taking care of real human needs. We can do that. We need international law, we need human rights, and we need diplomacy right now. We're not going to get it from the current power structure, which is, again, a paper tiger, which is failing us right now. People don't know largely how badly it is failing us, but people feel it economically. So there's enormous potential to continue this movement for change. And one of the best outcomes, I think, of this last election is that we have a whole new partnership now, particularly with the Muslim American community, the anti-war community, the students, the Green Party. We have enormous potential here and a whole variety of skills that can combine in a way to give us unprecedented reach and momentum.
Dr. Jill Stein, great pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Imran.